Hello there, my name is Maggie. Come join me by the fire for tonight's chilling story. This is the Life Suffocator. The air was cool and empty. The hoots of a nearby owl and the crunching of leaves beneath their boots filled the silence between Danny and Heather. In the back pocket of Heather's jeans, a small shovel poked out slightly. She adjusted her long woven sweater to cover it. Then she caught Danny's eyes as they turned into the cemetery. "What?" she asked confidently. "Are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, look, I know this guy was bad news and all, but should we really be digging up a dead man's body?" "Bad news? He buried multiple people alive and never had to suffer any consequences. He doesn't deserve eternal peace. Now, hurry up. I don't want Dawn to creep up on us." Danny sighed as she nodded and followed Heather up the hill of the cemetery to an old weary headstone entitled Robert Crane. A slight breeze picked up and tousled Danny's hair. She gulped as she watched Heather slowly descend to the dead grass beneath them, her shovel in hand. "Are you sure you want to dig him up? I can." Danny tried to even her breathing. "I can do it if you want." "No need," Heather said. She stabbed the shovel into the grass and tucked a piece of her long brown hair behind her pale ear. "Do you know how deep bodies are buried?" "Heather, why would I know that?" Heather laughed a little, and the warmth of it sounded so foreign in such an eerie place. They both silenced as she continued to dig. "The saying is 6 feet, isn't it?" she asked when she hit some metal. "Well, is it?" "Something like that." She rose from her crouched position, taking a step back to stand next to Danny, whose knees were shaking violently. Heather reached her hand out to calm her. "Dude, it's fine. Let's just get this over with. He deserves it, remember?" "Yeah, I know. It just feels like someone's watching us." "Oh, please, you're supposed to be the sensible one, Danny. This isn't a ghost story." Danny's skin became cold when Heather dropped to her knees once more to finish digging. She looked up at Danny and then put the shovel down in the grass beside the newly dug hole and reached down to open the casket. Danny's hands went straight to her eyes as she blocked her vision of the body. "Heather?" There was no response. In fear of what happened to Heather, she immediately moved her hands, only to discover she was still there, crouched down over the bodiless open casket. "What are you doing?" She didn't respond, her eyes wide. Then she reached into the casket and took out a piece of paper, handing it to Danny silently. "It's okay to kill someone, as long as they deserved it," she read aloud slowly. She looked at Heather in terror, handing the note back to her. Heather replaced the note in the casket and shut it harshly, the sound echoing through the night. The whip of a tree's branch in the wind was enough for Danny to grab Heather's cold, clammy hand in fear and run. There was something peculiar in the air. Something heavy and sinister, and Danny couldn't even be sure if she was the only one to feel it. Heather had a blank stare upon her face as they continued running. "Wait," Heather yelled out. Danny stopped and stared at her. "The shovel. Digging up a grave is a crime. It had my fingerprints." "We have to go back," Danny said without another thought, despite her fear. Everywhere they turned, Danny saw figures and shadows, but all this fear did was make her hold onto Heather tighter as they sprinted for the shovel. When they made it back, it was gone. "Where could it be?" Heather asked breathlessly. "No one else is here." "Wrong." It was a voice, hollow and emotionless. Was it even human? "Who's there?" Heather asked. Her usual brave tone was a mask to reveal a kind of whimper. Now that even Heather was afraid, Danny knew it was time to panic. There were the sounds of footsteps in the night. Danny could never forget how frozen she was as they became louder and louder. She no longer had the instinct to fly, nor to fight. Everything was cold and dull and so unreal. There was a fog covering her, making all her movements slower, and all the sounds of the night softer. She watched wordlessly as a floating shovel moved past her. The casket began to reopen, as did her mouth, and yet no words could fall out, not even a mere yell. Heather was more alert than her. She was still moving, trembling, and yet she didn't run either. In fact, it seemed like she was being pulled and then pushed into the open casket as she screamed for Danny. But Danny couldn't move. Neither could Heather anymore. Just like it seemed the air had pulled Heather in, it seemed to have begun filling the dirt back in, the floating shovel doing all the work. The same empty voice from before spoke once more. "It's okay to kill someone, as long as they deserved it. You better never come back to my grave, or I will bury you as I did your friend." Danny still couldn't move, but she built up the strength to say, "Who are you?" "Robert Crane, of course, you know that." "Now run off, and if I see you come back, you'll be next." Danny felt her muscles soften and her thoughts quicken, and then somehow remembered how to move. And so she did, as quick as she could, as she sobbed terribly. Now, Danny exited the cemetery alone. the only sound being her own crying as she began to process that she had met Robert Crane, the Life Suffocator, and that Heather's life had been suffocated. Thank you for joining me by the fire and listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. Good night.